My name is Bob Wilson. I'm professor of church history at Acadia Divinity College, and this is the third in our series on interviews with Dr. Freeman Fenerty. Dr. Fenerty, there are some unanswered questions that are left over from the other interviews, and I'd like to pursue those with you now.
Go ahead.
First of all, what was it like when you first went to Newfoundland to be a Baptist in Newfoundland?
Well, I found I had to change gears quite a bit. In Kentville, if you came to church on Sunday morning, I would get your name, and inside of that week I'd probably be seeing you at your home, meet your family. I tried that in Newfoundland, and they never came back. My sister-in-law said to me one time, "You called them so-and-so," and I said, "Yes," and they never came back. No. Well, you went it the wrong way. They don't know you. They don't know what Baptists are, and they don't want to get involved. But among the clergy, among the ministers there, I found a good response on the whole. In St. John's, it was particularly fine. There were some people who knew Baptists. There was when I went to one of the other places, there was a bit of icy aloofness. "What are you doing horning in here?" But there was a very strong religious or church consciousness in Newfoundland at the time. But they accepted me, and I had no problem. Made some wonderful friends, and they didn't think. They came to the point where they didn't think I was a threat, and I had a very enjoyable time.
One of the questions that I did want to ask you relates to people who have had an influence on your life, and I'd really like to know a little bit more about your wife. We haven't mentioned her name yet, how you met her, any of those questions.
Well, Ethel and I met in church. We attend the same church. And her people were church people, too. When I went to Halifax, I felt I should link up with a church there. And I did. I went to board with a family from that church, a fine Christian family who treated me like their own boy. I had a real fine start in the city. And she and her family attended the Temple Church, which is where Northwood Manor is now. And we met, and I thought she was quite a girl, and so we started going around together. We chummed around for 5 years, because in those days you didn't get married until you were able to support yourself. And it was 5 years before I was making enough money to really feel free to do that. But one thing, as I said earlier in the interview, that if it hadn't been for her support and her part she played, I couldn't have done all the work that I've done, because she gave me a free hand to do what I felt I should do and backed me up in it. In fact, going to Newfoundland, for example, was one of them. Coming back to Aldershot from Newfoundland on 2/3 of minimum salary, you know, a woman is under quite a bit of strain there. And another thing, we had no office work, no office help, and so everything had to be handled from the study, and the study was in the house. So she got the phone calls that I couldn't get. So I certainly appreciate the cooperation and the support that she has given me.
What other individuals influenced you early in your Christian life? You've told us the story about the Oxford group and that call to ministry, but are there other individuals who stand out from that point in your life?
It seems strange, but I don't see early. I think growing up in my years from 16 to 20 in that Christian home was a good influence. Mr. and Mrs. Bourne were their names, and it was good for me. Sunday nights, she'd gather around the piano and we'd have a sing. You know, that encouragement to keep on in church. That was a good influence in my life. When I got into leadership, it was a case of being among my peers. And so you have influence on one another. You're picking their brains and they're picking yours, you know, or they're sharing ideas. And I can't pick out anyone in particular who had an outstanding influence on my life. I was with a group of people who thought along the same line. Don MacPhail was the General Secretary of the YMCA at that time, and Don, I looked up to Don as quite a person. But it was in the ministry that I found myself as people. I think, for example, of in Kentville Church, in the Kennard Church, my deacons there, a wonderful group of men, and with me, encouraged me, and stood by me. Here was a young preacher just finding his way, you know, and they were a good group. In Kentville, there were 2 or 3 men who, Harry Bolster ran a feed business. His home was Halls Harbor originally. And Harry was a great encourager, great support. I think of one of the best lessons I learned was from one of my men in Kentville, Terry Meek. He was the general manager of the United Fruit Company office there. And Terry and I were driving across the Cornwallis Bridge one time, and Terry said, "Freeman, you get a lot further if you learn to express appreciation." It probably took a lot of courage for him to say that to the preacher. But I thought about that, and you know, that was one of the finest bits of advice I ever got in my life, to express appreciation, because I thought, well, Freeman, you're only the captain of this team. You got a whole team. And the more you can get from your team, the better for the Lord's work. You better take a tumble to yourself. I learned that lesson.
Now, you've worked along with a lot of leaders in the Baptist work. Why don't you tell us a bit about some of those people? You mentioned B.D. Stevens earlier. Tell us a bit about B.D. Stevens.
B.D. Stevens was a remarkable man, and maybe it's a case of us reacting on one another. I was called on to speak at the Baptist men at Hammonds Plains one day, and B.D. and a group were there from Halifax. And I said to them, one thing bothers me. The whole north end of Halifax hasn't got a Baptist church. On the way back, B.D. said to the men in the car, I got a couple of building lots up there. He had the lumber all ready to build something on them. He said, I'll let the association have those lots if they, for a nominal amount. And he took that amount and put it into the church later. And that was the start of B.D.'s work. But he went to Moncton to a meeting, and R.G. Letourneau was there. And Letourneau said to him, what do you do for a living? He said, I build houses. He said, do you ever think of building churches for the Lord? And you see, the two things clicked. And B.D. was right in, he's set and going. And I worked with him in Newfoundland. I got advice from him building at Aldershot. And at Mount Uniacke and Elmsdale, in his later years, we worked very, very closely together. I got the people together. B.D. arranged financing and building. Together we cooked up a program and approached the things, and we were the team. But in the ministry there were others. Walter Macomb had a great influence in my life. He was a real gem. And I think probably he had, among the ministers, he had the most influence on the course I took.
Tell me a little bit more about Walter Macomb, because he was our, well, actually the second General Secretary,
yes.
But he had been active in the Maritime Religious Education Council, and then he becomes the executive minister, what we would call executive minister today. What kind of leader was he?
He was a top-notch leader, an excellent executive, and a good pastor. I followed him in Kentville. Anyhow, I met Walter Macomb first in Halifax. He was in doing our Sunday school work, youth work, and he was talking about Tuxas work, and it got me interested. And then when I came to Kennard, when I came to college rather, I spoke to the young peoples. He had me up and spoke to the young peoples. And went to Kennard. He must have maneuvered somehow. I was on the board of the Religious Education Council, the boys' board. So we worked on boys' conferences, boys' parliaments, boys' camps together. And then I went to Kentville, and I got a chance to know how he was as a pastor, a very capable, well-organized man. And he made sure everybody got pastoral attention.
Now, he died very suddenly.
Yes, he took a cerebral hemorrhage. And he was only in his late 50s or early 60s. And he had to go to the hospital with that, and he died there.
There are some others, I'm sure, whom you have known. What about Myron Brinton?
Yes, I got to know Myron very well. See, Myron, I came to Horton Academy from Central Baptist Church, Halifax. Myron came as pastor there 2 or 3 years after I left, so I knew him, my people knew him, my wife's people knew him as a pastor, an excellent pastor and a good preacher. And so I got to know him there, and then I got to know him again. In convention, you meet these people just passing by, you say hello and talk for a while. But at the Bible training school, I was on the board there for 5 years. And so again, I was working with Myron Brenton. And in later years, I came over from Newfoundland to take part in a mission school in the Elbert County, I think it was, pretty well. And I stayed at Myron Brenton's. So through the years, we have been in contact, and at Christmas time, we always get in touch with each other until of course, he died this year.
What about Abner Langley? You know, you had long contact with him.
Abner and I, in Halifax, they had a Christian Endeavor Union in which several churches were linked up. And Abner was a member at West End Church, and I was at Central, but we were working together in the Christian Endeavor Union. At the time, Abner and some others went away to study for the ministry. I should have gone too, but I was afraid, as I mentioned earlier. I was afraid, and I didn't get away till 5 years later. So Abner got through and over to Gordon. Probably if I'd gone then, I'd have gone to Gordon, because the Reverend Doleman was a minister at West End. He was a Gordon man, and he encouraged the students to go to Gordon. And probably I'd have done the same. But I stuck around 5 years more.
What about his role at the Divinity College?
Abner, as you know, was a unique character. Abner could say things right to the point. He was a man among men. And he and B.D. had an awful lot in common. Their ability to relate to people. He was unique.
Why don't you expand upon that a little bit? How did he work? Because I know that he was a great fundraiser in his own way, and yet he always seemed to be sort of, giving you the impression that he wasn't really as sharp as he really was.
Well, he was. He was a miserable car driver, I'll tell you that. Occasions know that. But he had the ability to get through to people. He wouldn't be the flowery orator that lots of men were. But he got his message across, and he could relate to people, and he was a worker.
Are there some others whom you think of?
Well,
like the Steve's brothers you mentioned earlier, or?
If you were to ask me who I thought was the outstanding man who has come through in my lifetime, I would say that Harold Minton, without exception, is probably the most capable all-around man that Acadia has produced. An excellent preacher, and a dedicated pastor, and a good organizer. And to get all those together, and a good evangelist. Get those all together, you got an exceptional person. I think that Harold would stand out among the men of recent years.
You mentioned earlier your relationship with the Steve's brothers, Stephen and Winston.
Yes. Well, of course, as you know, that goes way back to the beginning of the Bible school, because they were both very much interested in the work there and played a big part in it. And later on in the years, I was on the board of Baptist men, for a number of years. In fact, I served my 6 years, and then they conscripted me to go in and from a ex officio capacity for a year, then I was on for 6 more years. So I had 13 years with the Board of Baptist Men. And they were both active there, particularly Stephen. Winston was tied up more with his business. Stephen evidently could get away a bit more easily. But I kept in touch with them through the years. Still am in touch with Winston's wife. See, they're all gone now. Stephen's wife is still living, I think. But the high appreciation for those men. See, they came from ordinary beginnings, and they did a good job, and the Lord blessed them.
When you take a look at some young leaders you see around you today, are there any that impress you at this point?
Well, I should have had a little bit of time to think about that one, because there's no doubt about it. Okay, perhaps I tell you, this is my impression. One of the things that makes me happy about the Div College right now is the number of men who have come in from other occupations. In other words, they've learned a lot of life lessons before they've come away to study. They have a lot to contribute. I think of Charlie Hudson, who I knew before he went away to study. He was comptroller, I think, of Central Trust. I think of Dickie Moore. He was in charge of the X-ray department at Digby Hospital. When I was in Lower Granville filling in, I had a class for laymen to teach them how to lead church services. And Fred Bigelow, who's now at Wilmot, and Dickie Moore, who was then at Digby Hospital, were two of the men in that class. And here they are both in the ministry. But what I'm saying is that these men, and we have several of them. I think of Phil Locke again, men like that. I think they have a lot to contribute to the ministry. And I'm very happy to see that type of person coming into study.
If you had some advice to give to young men and women who are going into pastoral ministry at this point in time, what advice would you give them?
I think I would give them those 3 points that I started out with. There should be a deep concern for the spiritual welfare of people. That would take precedence even over their families. Now that may seem like heresy, but precedence over their family. The Lord has His way of working the family out. If you work things out for Him, I'm sure of that from our experience. That'd be the first thing. And the second thing I would say to them, don't count your work in 40 hours a week. In the Lord's work, you're on duty all the time. You'll find you have time for yourself as you go along, but don't be too fussy when it comes.
Now, we have
I'll just say one other thing.
Okay.
And that is, have a working knowledge of your Bible, because you're going to need it. And one thing that I neglected to do, I've never been on a pastorate where I wasn't going as my coattails flying. And one thing that I neglected, which Admiral Lang was good at, and that was to be able to know where a verse in a passage was found, memorize it. I used my concordance, and it's not adequate. I would say to young people going in the ministry, know where key things are, where you can just go right to them in your Bible without looking up the concordance.
Freeman, are there any other things that in the midst of our conversation that we haven't covered? We've asked you about many things, but...
Well, the thing that perhaps would be good to say is that of recent years, one of the things, realizing that life runs out, I'm more than anxious to share anything I have of value with those who are coming on, because I've learned a lot, and still learning, learned a lot about the ministry and about people, and I'm anxious to share anything I can that will help somebody else to go further than I've ever gone.
Freeman, you talked about sharing. Would you tell us a little bit about your concept of money as it relates to how you've handled it both in ministry and in retirement?
I could keep it going an hour or so on that one, because we've gone the gamut. One time in college, we had 12 cents in the house for 9 days, but we had some milk tickets and vegetables. But way back in young people's days, we both decided we would tithe. It's been, we've done it right through. And the thing that amazes me is what happens. I can't explain it logically, but it happens that we have never yet gone without. We've never yet been hungry. And even though we haven't had much to play with for years we couldn't rub 2 nickels together, you know, but nevertheless, we tithed. And what you find when you tithe is that, first of all, you tithe your tenth, but something else comes up. You don't count the cost. You just give anyway. So you're giving actually more than your tenth by quite a bit. But what it has taught me is that when you take the Lord into your financing as well as into your life and your work, somehow He blesses it and uses it. And I can't explain why, unless it is that you're thinking more of doing things in partnership with Him. So what I'm perhaps saying is that we've had tough times. I went to Kennard on less money than the farmers were paying to their hired men. But what was happening, here's a farmer would kill a pig for the winter and we'd get a roasted beef. We'd have a dozen eggs for here and some fruit or something. We were never hungry, but we never had much to throw away. And actually, since the children grew up and we retired, things have been much more comfortable financially than they were going through the ministry. I don't know if that answered your question, Mark?
Yes. I know that you also have a concept about annuities and so on, because I've heard you give advice to various people about retirement and getting settled in and yet trying to make provision for other things in those ages.
Well, the way I feel about annuities, my family's all grown up and they're capable of looking after themselves. But there are some things I'm very much interested in. I'm interested in the Overseas Mission Board, very much interested, because I've been there, you see. I've visited their mission areas. I'm interested in the ADC. I'm interested in ABC. I'm interested in the Bible Society. How can I put spare money that I'm investing into these organizations so they get it, and instead of having secession duties and all this sort of thing to think about, but I am getting the money I need by way of income, and they get the money, resources when I don't need it. So I figure that annuities are a good investment for the Christian. There's annuities in Christian things. Is that what you meant, Bob?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. But I feel quite keenly about that. That I want my money to work for the Lord, put it that way.
Well, Freeman, we would like to thank you very much for being willing to share with us from your life's experience. It's been a good time together, and we trust that the Lord will continue to bless you in these years. I see you're still active and doing interim preaching even at your home church in these days.
Well, I'm glad and I'm thankful that I've been able to do it, thankful for the years He's given me and the strength to do it.
Thank you very much.
Glad to be here.